My session is going to be really just to really tag along with what Daniel talked about and kind of take a little deeper dive into where you may find some of these different beetle species and also what you can do as a professional to control and prevent the beetles from infesting any of these structures or wooden articles. But I want to share with you something that's very close to me, a market segment that I've been working on for several years now. If you are from Tennessee or in Kentucky, you may be familiar with these types of buildings, but these are whiskey and bourbon warehouses. And here in Tennessee, we're known for the whiskey, but if you go up to the northern bluegrass state of Kentucky, bourbon reigns supreme up there. But woodborne beetles have an affinity for these types of structures. So if you know anything about bourbon or whiskey production, what you find out is that as a barrel of alcohol ages over time, all right, because they can age anywhere from 2 to 4 years on up to 20 plus years. That's the most expensive stuff. All right. But as it ages, you get this water evaporation that takes place. Okay. So these warehouses over time would absorb a lot of the moisture as it evaporates the barrels themselves, and the wood absorbs that moisture, but the beetles are using this high humid environment and the high moisture content of the wood as a food source. And so you'll see that you'll have some evidence. In this case, it is the Anobian beetle because they love this type of wood. It doesn't matter to the Anobian beetle the age of the wood. It could be an older wood. It could be somewhat of a newer type of wood, but the Anobian feeds on the cellulose. And so what's happening, though, is in these types of facilities, they are consuming or using the cellulose that is in the wood itself, thus reducing the structural integrity of those particular boards. All right, so this is something that that is very problematic for some distillers in the industry. We're doing a lot of work there, but I'm going to share with you some more stories about this later on. But one thing I wanted to really focus on is understand that wood is a hygroscopic material, which means as the humidity in an environment increases, so does the moisture content of that wood. Okay, so moisture control is one of your strategies that you have to prevent beetles. Okay, if you can reduce the humidity in an area, such as a crawl space, for example, if I keep that humidity down to say below 60% or 55%, then you are actually reducing the ability of that wood in that crawl space from absorbing that moisture, because moisture is critical for the beetles to survive. All right. In the case of Anobian beetles, they need somewhere around 13%, 12, 13, 14% moisture content. Okay. So in our area, like in the Southeast, where I'm here in Tennessee, the normal moisture content of wood in crawl spaces can be anywhere between 15 to 19%. All right, so that's normal in the summertime. So that makes it more suitable for that. So understand that there is a direct relationship between moisture content and the actual humidity in the area. So there is a mathematical formula when it comes to trying to understand the amount of damages that beetles do cause. So if you want to try to figure out the amount of infestation, the type of damage in any species, then there are some things that we kind of need to know to kind of tag along on what Daniel discussed earlier. What type of wood are we dealing with? Is it a hardwood or is it a softwood? Because it matters. Not all beetle species infest the same type of wood. So if it's a hardwood species or a softwood species, in a lot of ways, you can kind of eliminate a whole category of beetles just by knowing the type of species of wood that you're dealing with, and actually the condition of that wood and the age of that wood. Is it a relatively new piece of wood, or is it an old piece of wood that's been in a barn for 100 years, like some of these distiller warehouses are? All right. If you know these types of things, then again, you can also eliminate categories. For example, the lit-tip beetle. All right. The lit-tip beetle primarily feeds on hardwood, but its preference is for newer wood because the starch content is what the lit-tip beetle feeds on. But as that wood ages, starch becomes less and less, and it becomes not very suitable for them. Okay, so if you're dealing with old hardwood, chances you're dealing with a lit-tip beetle is probably not the lit-tip. It's going to be something else. So knowing these types of things with the type of wood and the age of the wood is also an important factor. And also, what are the environmental conditions? Is it a very high humid environment? Does it have low humidity? Those types of things matter as well. Okay. So one thing I always stress is the questions that we get coming into the corporate office, or people call me about these beetles, is, Harry, I got a beetle. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what type of species is it. Well, my first question is, well, do you know what type of wood you're dealing with? Because hardwoods are your deciduous trees. This time of year, if you got a lot of hardwoods in your backyard, guess what you're doing? You're raking leaves. All right. Those are your hardwood species. Your softwoods are like your southern yellow pines, your conifers. What I say, those are your holiday trees. Okay. So knowing the difference between your hardwoods and your softwoods is critical when you're doing any type of beetle work. Now, here is the actual beetle life cycle. Okay. Now, how many of you have actually seen a live platypus beetle? Now, I can probably guess a dozen of you in this room. In fact, I know some names in this room that have actually seen live platypus beetles. I've talked with you about these, but very few of us have actually seen a live platypus beetle because their whole life is spent within the wood, basically. Okay, so the egg takes about several weeks to hatch, and then it hatches into the larvae. The larvae, what causes the damage. Okay, depending on the species, the larvae can be as long as 6 months to several years. All right, but here's what larvae does. Larvae causes a tremendous amount of damage. In this case right here, this is anobid larvae. All right. And I don't know if you can kind of see this, but right here is a cross-section cut of a wood that has anobid beetle damage. All right. And you can see all the tunnels in here. In this case, the anobids have been consuming the cellulose of the wood and using that as the food source. All right. So as it goes through the life cycle, then it goes to the pupae stage, and then it emerges out as an adult and starts the process over again if there are suitable wood nearby. Okay, so if, for example, the beetle emerges out of a piece of wood that has a stain or finish, like hardwood floors or cabinets, chance of them reinfesting that significantly lower than it would be if there was bare wood laying around. Okay, so keep these things in mind. But what you will see are the exit holes, or your customer will see the exit holes and the frass that comes around those exit holes, and that's when you start getting the phone calls. Okay, so you may never actually see the beetle itself, but if you know the type of frass you're dealing with, you know the size of the hole and the type of wood, you can get pretty close to identifying the species without actually seeing the actual live beetle. Daniel's pictures are 10 times better, bud pictures are, than what I have. But here is the actual lit-tip beetle, the true platypus beetle that's primarily found in your new hardwoods. And if you got a customer that calls you with a lit-tip beetle infestation or platypus beetle infestation, and it happened a few months after they just had brand new hardwood floors installed in their house, chances are the lit-tip beetles were already in the wood prior to it going through the planting stage and getting put into the home. All right. When I get questions like these from professionals wanting to say, "Hey, Harry, I got a homeowner with new cabinets, or they got new hardwood floors. What can I do?" Well, truth be known to that, I am going to encourage the homeowner to contact the flooring company or the wood company and have a conversation with them to see if they can actually get the wood replaced, because it happened back at the mill, primarily because either the wood wasn't kiln dried or it was kiln dried, but improperly stored. And it gave access to the lichted beetle females from being able to use that wood as to lay her eggs in. Okay. Oftentimes, I'm going to encourage the professional, talk to the homeowner about just replacing planks. Many times, if you have hardwood floors with lichted beetles, it is only a few planks, maybe 1 or 2 planks, that have exit holes in them. The easiest thing to do is just to replace the planks if you can. Okay, now if the whole floor is completely engulfed in exit holes and it's a lichted beetle, that happened back at the mill. So I will be more inclined to encourage them to have a conversation with the flooring company to see if they can get that wood replaced. Okay, and here are some examples of some fine wood. You can kind of see underneath these little steps, there's some tiny little holes in here. Beetles did not infest this wood after the installation. It happened back at the mill. Okay, so usually I am going to encourage folks to actually contact their provider, the actual wood provider, to see about getting that wood replaced. Okay, and here's a close-up look of lichted beetles, and you can see the frass. So this is kind of a good indicator of what's going on here. Now, Daniel also mentioned bostrichid beetles. It is a kind of a unique beetle. We don't get a lot of phone calls on bostrichid beetles, but I will say this though. One of my buddies, Brian Nichols, I hope he's on this call, but he shared these pictures with me a few years ago. This is bamboo wood, and this is actually bostrichid beetles that likes to infest bamboo. You know, kind of like a bamboo borer, for example. Okay, those are part of the bostrichid family. But here, their frass of the bostrichid beetles has kind of it is a powdered frass, but it's more of a mealy cornmeal type texture to it. Okay, but bostrichid beetles are commonly associated with your imported and your tropical woods. Now, the Anobian beetle, which is part of the Pachynidae family. Now, this is where we get a tremendous amount of phone calls on this particular species. Now, I call this the moneymaker beetle because this is the beetle that you could have the opportunity to actually go out and do some services and do some training and do some treatments on to generate a revenue stream. All right. Now, where you would find these types of beetles, this type of species, is going to be like inside of a crawl space, for example. What goes on inside of a crawl space, particularly a traditional crawl space that may not be a closed or an encapsulated crawl space. It's a traditional crawl space. It's got a vapor barrier on the floor and maybe some foundation vents. But if that crawl space is damp or has a high humidity, then remember, there's a direct correlation between the moisture content of the wood and the relative humidity of the environment. So as the wood as the humidity increases, the moisture content of that wood increases, thus making it a lot suitable for the development of Anobian beetles in the wood. So look really closely. See those little streaks of the powdery sawdust you see there? Well, those are some pretty decent evidence that you have some emergent activity coming in. Now, before I start going crazy here, I'm probably going to pay close attention to it because I'm going to look at the frass a little bit, see the color of it. Does it have the color of freshly sawn wood? In other words, like when you take a saw and you saw a piece of wood, it's got that really fresh look to it. That's an indicator that it is actually a fresh exit hole. Because if it's got a lot of grit in it, it's dirty, it has the color of the surrounding wood, chances are that might be some old infestation damage. Okay, so I like to look at the actual frass and, if possible, look inside the hole with a magnifying lens and be able to determine what's actually going on inside there. Okay, so but in this case, though, this is a prime area where you would have Anobian beetle activity. All right. Now, remember, antibiotics feeds on cellulose. Okay, and the cellulose is it gives the wood its strength. So as the antibiotic beetle feeds on that cellulose, it does compromise the structural integrity of that wood. Now, is it going to cause a significant amount of damage like within a year or two? No, it takes several years for that to occur. Okay, we're talking about several years of emergence and reinfesting over time. But sometimes you may have homes that have no one's ever been inside of the crawl space in years. They don't have a pest control service or nothing. But these things can just go on and on, unattended, unseen, sight unseen, yet here we have a tremendous amount going on, and you can have significant structural damage over time. Okay, reclaimed wood. This is a call that I had gotten, a few years ago, where this entrepreneur had traveled the U.S., tearing down old barns and old sheds and using that wood, repurposing that wood, and selling it online to home builders and craft builders and remodelers, or even homeowners who was wanting to put in some special wood in their houses or something. And what happened is that when he was bringing the wood back to the shop and cleaning it and getting it down to his natural patina, he would sell it. And then a few months later, these homeowners are calling up and say, "Hey, I got this bugs in my wood, or I got this sawdust on the floor." Come to find out is that he did not have a kiln on site, or well, another way of just a giant oven where he could heat the wood up to around 120 or 130 degrees to kill all the different stages. So I went out there to visit him, and sure enough, all the wood that you see in this photo looks very much like the one in the upper left-hand corner, all those exit holes. So even though you got a lot of old exit holes, you still have a lot of the wood that's got some larvae activity in there. And then when the wood gets sold and sent to the homeowner, and over time, those beetles are continuing to develop, and then they emerge. So what we did is that I partnered him up with a pest control company to actually go out there and treat all the wood, doing topical wood treatments as a good service to actually kill and prevent any of these beetles from becoming a future issue. As I mentioned earlier about the whiskey and bourbon facilities, this is in one of my distillery clients. What do you think is going on here? Well, they're allowed to emerge and infest over several years now. People who work in these warehouses, they're not pest control experts. I mean, they work in a warehouse, and oftentimes, the barrels are put in and just left alone for several years to age. You may not go in those warehouses for several months. Okay, so what's happening here is that you have a constant emerging and reinfesting of these beetles, these antibiotic beetles, emerging out of the wood and then going right back in and just laying eggs. Because what happens, the antibiotic females, what she'll do is she will oftentimes taste the wood first before laying the eggs to make sure that there's enough nutrients to support her brood. So keep this in mind, that climate control in these types of environments is challenging because, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a 55-gallon barrel of whiskey or bourbon rolled in there, over time, the water evaporates out of the barrel, leaving back the alcohol, which gives us its proof. Okay, so what starts out as 55 gallons of alcohol on day one, by the time the 5th year or the 6th year or the 10th year rolls around, it could be as low as 42 to 36 or so gallons of alcohol. Well, where did all that water go? Where did all the other liquid go? Well, it evaporates. All right. So remember, wood is hygroscopic, so it absorbs the moisture. So that whole environment made it suitable for these beetles to thrive. All right. And here is a cross section of the piece of wood that has a significant amount of antibiotic beetle damage. I'm actually holding that same piece of wood in my hand. Now, this is hardwood. All right. But this piece of wood right here is light as a feather. It should weigh probably around 15, 20 pounds by the sheer size of it, but it doesn't. I mean, it has a significant amount of weight loss because the cellulose has been basically consumed by these antibiotic beetles. You know, like a 2% weight loss in wood can mean as much as 30% or more structural strength loss. That's pretty major. So that's why antibiotic beetles, if you have antibiotic beetles, take those seriously. Don't just kind of kick the can down the road and ignore it, because over time it can become an issue. Inspection and detection is critical. The majority of the life cycle takes place within the wood. Take your time, take a good flashlight and just do a very thorough inspection because they are tiny, they're small. So we need to be very thorough with looking to try to find the sources of these. Now, Daniel kind of showed this same type of photo earlier in his segment, but this is the actual beetle ID card that I have in my hand. So if you're interested in having some of these cards, please text me at that number you see at the bottom of the screen. Let me know how many cards you would like. We have plenty of these cards in stock. But what these do is that these cards are exit holes are to scale. So if you come up on a piece of wood that's got some exit holes, you want to try to find out, well, what am I dealing with here? You can take this card, put up against the size of the hole, and it'll give you a little bit of clues as to which species that you're dealing with. So I have plenty of these cards available, so you can text me at that number and we will ship you as many cards as you would like, okay? Moisture meter is critical because moisture control is one of your strategies, okay? So if you can do moisture control, then you need a good moisture meter, all right? So I'm an advocate of having a moisture meter. If you're doing any type of WDO work, you should have a moisture meter. All right. So moisture control is going to be one of your strategies that you have. Understand, though, that larval development has a sweet spot, and that's going to be in the temperature zone between 70 and 90 degrees, the humidity around 80%, and the moisture content 12, 13% or higher. Now, if you can get that humidity down to below 60%, as I mentioned earlier, then you basically are going to make it very difficult for antibiotic beetles eggs to hatch. Okay, so that's why moisture control is one of your tips that you have. I'm a big fan of doing wood replacement. In this case, what a lot of the distillers are doing, they're actually taking out all of the damaged wood that has exit holes and replacing it with new wood, but they're treating the wood first. The pest control company goes out and they spray the wood with a BoraCare borate wood treatment before the wood gets placed back into the distiller. Okay, so that's one of the things that they're doing there. Is I'm a big fan of doing wood replacement, but if you're going to do wood replacement, at least try to treat it with the borates before that takes place. Now, I mentioned the borate formulations. These are two very popular products that we have at Nisus Corporation that we manufacture for platypus beetles, for the various different species of platypus beetles. They both have the same active ingredient, which is disodium octaborate tetrahydrate, but they're different in the sense that one is a powder and one is a liquid glycol. Now, if you're doing any type of topical applications on active infestations, keyword, active infestations, I am going to encourage the BoraCare. The reason being, in a finished gallon, because 1 gallon of BoraCare mixes with 1 gallon of water, that's a 23% active ingredient solution in a finished gallon. The BoraCare is going to give you a much more thorough diffusion into the wood. I'm talking about the penetration into the wood itself to get to where the larvae is doing the damage. Okay, so this is what you want. You want that BoraCare to go into the wood to where the larvae is. All right. Now, Timbor, very popular product to use for beetles as well. But Timbor, being a powder, its carrier is primarily going to be water. So you're going to get more or less a surface diffusion. It's not as deep as it would be with BoraCare. But if the Timbor is good for doing active work, but it's possible that you can still have some post-treatment emergence. Okay. So I like to do both of these applications at a full label, 1 gallon of bore care for 1 gallon of water, and 10 bore would be basically is 1 pouch. We have these 10 bore in pouches, which is a 1.5 pound pouch for 1 gallon of water, but you really got to get it mixed. Okay. And then do your topical treatment on bare wood only, not painted or stained wood. It has to be bare wood, because if you spray it on a stained surface, you're going to have some issues down the road. All right. That means you're going to have a lot of chalkiness on it, because the water eventually evaporate off and leave a chalky white film. That's not what you want. Okay. So make sure that it is a bare wood. Again, for active infestations, I'm always going to encourage the use of Boracare because it has a higher boron content, about 53% more active ingredient than the 10 bore finished gallon would, and you get a much more thorough treatment. Now, if you're doing preventative, like if you're spraying the wood in a crawl space, either one of these products are fine. Okay, either one is good. But for active, I'm always going to encourage the use of Boracare for that. It works from a standpoint of basically, preventing the beetles from being able to convert their preferred food source into energy. Okay, that's basically how it works. It also destroys the insects and intestinal microbes. And there is another benefit with the borates, is that it gives you some control against wood decay fungi, because in a lot of ways, if you have a high moisture area, like in a crawl space, for example, you could potentially have some fungus challenges too. So if you can kind of correct those moisture issues, then you could also go in and do a Boracare treatment, get some control against the wood fungi as well as your palatable beetles. I love using Boracare for beetles primarily because it gives you a long-term resistance protection. It's so easy to apply. It is odorless. The key thing is to make sure you get it mixed well, mixed properly before you start doing any type of topical application. The process of the borates is that both of these products, they do diffuse into the wood. They do penetrate into the wood. But Boracare is going to give you a much more thorough diffusion into the wood. And understand this as well, is that the type of wood that you're dealing with, it being a hardwood or a softwood, the borates, either one of these will penetrate a little bit easier and faster, in theory, in softwood than it would with hardwood. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind as well. All right, and here is a real world photo that was actually taken by our scientists at Nisus Corporation, where they took a 6x8 beam and they sprayed all 4 sides of it with the Boracare solution, and then a special dye is added to that to kind of show the presence of the active ingredient into the wood. So you'll see that in this cross section of this beam, you'll see that red dye is the actual presence of the active ingredient. So this is what you want to happen. All right, this is what you want to achieve, because you want the borate to be able to get down into the wood where the larvae is. All right, so this red dye shows the presence of the actual active ingredient at a certain parts per million. Okay, actually, the penetration goes beyond that red dye a little bit. All right, but this is what you want. All right, this is why I'm always advocating the use of the Boracare for active infestations versus using the powder bores as well. Now, there are some things you need to be conscientious of. Understand that it's possible that even after doing the treatment, that you can experience some post-treatment emergence, because if they're in a pupa stage, not much is really going to prevent them from continuing their life cycle short of fumigation. Okay, it's when they're in the larva stage. If you do the treatment while they're in the larva stage, that's when you start seeing a significant reduction of their activity. Okay, so understand that. That's why, when I'm talking to homeowners, or working with you while talking to the homeowners, I want to be able to manage the level of expectations a little bit. Understand that it's possible that there can be some post-treatment emergence because we don't see the beetles in the wood. So we don't really know what stage of life cycle they're in. And also understand that treatments are to bare wood, not sealed wood. So if you have a situation where there is nothing but sealed wood, a log cabin, for example, well, how are you going to treat that? Well, there are some things you can do. You can do injections into the wood, very labor intensive. But if they're adamant about wanting to have a borate treatment done, then stripping the wood of the finish itself would be a critical component so that you can actually go in and do a topical treatment as well. Now, there are some situations where you can actually have some isolated wooden articles where you can do a drill and inject a liquid borate solution into it, or you could use something that we have at NICERS. I don't know if you can see that really good on the photo. It's called JACTA, and this is a concentrated borate gel in a 300cc caulking tube. So if you got a kind of a caulking gun, then you can use this. You drill a hole into it, inject the gel into the hole, and then the borate will go into the wood itself. So it's great for those isolated situations where you have painted or stained wood and you need to be able to get borate into the wood without having to reduce the finish. Okay. Always remember that at the end of the day, the application is not always the service. It's your knowledge is the service. So hopefully with what Daniel shared with today, and I was able to kind of be his backup singer, share with you some of the things that you can do to actually do the treatments itself. Look, we have a whole scope of service at NICERS that shows how to calculate, how to do the treatments, and where to spray. So if you would like to have a copy of that, here is my contact information. If you would like to have a copy of this presentation, I'd be more than happy to send that to you in the PDF via text message or an email. All of my contact is there. And that is all I have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harry and Daniel. We appreciate your time in sharing all of your knowledge and expertise. We do have a couple questions as we have a few minutes left. So if the interior of a building is mostly wood structures, how would one detect if any of the wood-boring beetles are present if there are no signs of boring? I can repeat that if you need me to.
One more time.
Can you repeat?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please?
If the interior of a building is mostly wood structures, how would someone detect if any of the wood-boring beetles are present if there are no signs of boring?
You want to get that, Harry? You want me to?
I need you to kind of
Yeah.
that was a different question. I'm just interested.
Okay. If the interior of a building is mostly wood structures, how could someone detect if beetles are present if there are no signs of boring?
Well,
if there are
how
any
can you detect? I mean, I don't know if there's any way you can detect if the beetles are present unless you see actual exit holes, or one thing you can know is the conducive conditions in that environment. Like, for example, what is the moisture content of the wood? What is the humidity in that area? And what is going on in the surrounding area? Is that an area that is more suitable, most likely to have any type of wood-borne beetles? Without knowing that, that's actually seeing an exit hole or anything like that, I don't see how you could even know if there's something there.
Okay. How long and at what temperature would you need to freeze a small item to kill an infestation?
Oh, okay. If you're going to freeze it, you're talking 0 degrees. I believe it's, oh gosh, let's see, what was that?
48 hours? I'm going to say 48 hours, maybe
72 hours, according to the malice. So.
Okay. What are your feelings on heat treatment for furniture or wooden art?
Oh my goodness, wooden art. Painted. I have not had experience with that. I gotta be honest with you, if you're heat treating a painting that has a frame, I would worry about the paint. something
I
would
would.
happen, cracking or something like that. Unless you could remove the frame, then you can heat it. And that's hold on. I think I took some notes here on heating small items. You're talking,
It even
oh,
says, furniture as well.
oh, furniture. Yeah. Well, it depends on how you're going to containerize something like that, but you're talking 120 to 140 degrees or more. And it would be a difficult thing to do it with heat. I know people do heat for bed bugs and such, but unless you have some type of container, you can get that degrees up and hold that degree, that temperature for a period of time. It would be difficult in
Yeah.
my experience anyway.
Yeah. And usually it's got to be about 120 to 130 degrees. That's sort of like a kiln. It's like a kiln. It's like a wood kiln, so to speak. So, but I'm kind of on Daniel on this one. I'm not so sure about painted surfaces, what they would do to the actual paint itself.
What treatment would you recommend for eradication or fumigation?
Repeat that.
Yes.
What treatment would you recommend for fumigation with wood-borne beetles?
Oh, okay. Well, the choice is limited these days. And at one time we could use methyl bromide, but Vicane fluoride is your fumigant that you would use now. Once again, it would require putting a tint over a structure, or if it's a smaller item, you could have, depending on if the company is able to do it, a vault and move it into that vault, or take it to the company, and sometimes they'll actually wrap that. Let's say it's a piano and that has elected beetles in it. They can actually put a tint over the item right there on their property and fumigate it. Fumigation works pretty well. If it's done right, it's done. The beetles are gone. They're dead.
Okay. And lastly, Daniel, what are some challenges that you've encountered when identifying, beetles in your, long history, and how did you overcome that?
Study, experience, reading. And I was very fortunate because as a young man, I was very interested in this type of stuff. So I learned early. But my job with Florida Pest Control as a training coordinator, I was also involved in IDing. So reading and experience. I mean, that's what you have to do. It takes time to learn that stuff. There's not a day that goes by I don't learn something new in this industry, either from other people like Harry, or by just reading articles in PCT or any of the other, magazine and stuff that's out there. But it does. You have to basically study, research. That's the best I can tell you.
We are going to end this webinar. Thank you both so much for bearing with us, and thank you everyone for bearing with us through that technical difficulty. You were both awesome to hear from, and all of your expertise. So with that, recording of this webinar will be shared in the next 5 to 7 business days.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining.